Okay, so let's talk about what a binding is and why do I want to use this. And I'm going to use an example because once you understand the example, you'll understand what a binding engine does and why you want to use it. So let's just add a button on here. So we're just going to say button ID equals button do something, and we're going to say do something, right? And so when I click on this button, async do something, I want to, I'll add the event here. I'm not going to use it, but just so that it's clear in mind that this isn't a stock standard normal event. I'm just going to alert do something. Now I want to hook up this button so when you click on it, it will perform this code. So what do I normally need to do? Well, I need to say this dot click handler equals this dot, well, let's call it do something handler. Do something handler equals this dot do something dot bind this, and then I want to say this, in this case, because it isn't an element per se, the view model has a field on it called element that contains the actual element that you're using. So we'll do here query selector, and we'll say hash button do something, and then I want to say const element equals, and then we want to hook it up and say element dot add event listener click is equal to this dot do something handler, async disconnected callback. So just a note that the view model base, even though it's not technically a web component, it uses the same lifecycle events and language as if it was a web component. It just simplifies how you work with stuff, and a lot of the stuff on the CRS binding engine actually reuses language that you already know or should know on the binding. Like you could see on the form when we did this injection of string values into a bigger string, or the values into a string, we used the string template syntax from JavaScript. So just reusing this, what you kind of used to from a JavaScript perspective already. Anyway, back to this, we need to go and clean up this stuff. So let's just go and do that quickly. Actually, I don't. No, I don't need that. Yeah, actually, I do need that. I need to go and clean that up now. So, gotta change that sequencing around. Say that this is now equal to null, and here we want to remove the event handler, and then super.disconnected callback. This is necessary for the automatic cleanup processes to work, but this is a lot of code to write. Let's just go and test it quickly and make sure that we've created this correctly. So if I now go to my click example and I click on the button, it says do something. So okay, it's all tied up correctly, but it's a lot of work to do. It's noisy, and I have to remember to do the cleanup. Like if I don't do this, I'm essentially going to end up with a memory leak. So let's see how we can do the same thing using the binding engine instead. Alright, so to do the same thing on the binding engine, I'm going to delete all of that. I can delete all of that. All I really need is this guy. There's my do something, and I can now say, okay, so you have an event called click. So I can do this with mouse over mouse in any event that's on the element. And I'm going to say call. So when you are clicked, call the following function for me, and it is going to be do something. So now if I go back to this here and I go to my click example, let's open up the DevTools quickly, and we'll open up the app click example, so we can see there's nothing going on there, but when I click do something. Okay, well, what if I go and move away? What happens to the event? Well, the binding engine does all that code that you wrote initially on your behalf. So when you actually click the button, the do something function is called, and when you navigate away, all of those events are also cleaned up on your behalf. So you can see how this would drastically reduce the amount of code that you write, and also make it very convenient and fast to write your functionality. So what's the purpose of the binding engine? The purpose of the binding engine is to create a link between your JavaScript code and your HTML, right? So if you look at this form example that we had here, if I wanted to build this string up every time these values changed, I would gonna have to go write a whole lot of code to say, well, go and get me this input, add an event listener for each change event, then when this thing changes, go and find me this thing and inject that value in here, then go and find me this element, go listen to each change event, and when each change event happens, also update the string over here for me, and then remember to take those events off again and release the elements so that you don't end up with memory leaks. So that's painful. That's quite a lot of code to tie this interaction with this UI so that this can be updated, whereby if you go and look at the actual JavaScript for this, it's basically non-existent. So the binding engine writes all of that interactive code on your behalf for you, tying the JavaScript side of stuff through an expression builder onto the HTML. So for the next couple of videos, we'll be talking about all kinds of different expressions and features within the binding engine. But as long as you understand that the binding engine is there to reduce the amount of code that you write, to simplify interactions with these with the HTML and the JavaScript, and make things productive and fast, but still securing your memory by doing memory cleanup on your behalf. There's a whole lot of frameworks out in the world, and there's huge chunks of what those frameworks simplify your life about. And I would say a very good percentage, the vast majority in fact, has to do with simplifying that DOM-data relationship. So the binding engine, if you have a good binding engine that you can use, you don't actually even need a framework at all. The binding engine takes care of most of that heavy lifting that you want to do. And if you look at templating as an example, we have very robust templating capabilities native within the browser. And with the advent of web components, you really just don't need a framework. Go and find a good binding engine. I recommend Sierra's binding engine because it's mine. Wahaha. But all jokes aside, the binding engine is the thing that alleviates most of your stress with regards to application development.